Everyone expected fireworks. No one expected Crockett to drop that line. The stage was set for what was supposed to be a routine political debate. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just another televised discussion where experts argued points and the audience quietly observed. But the moment these two stepped onto the stage, everyone watching, even from home, could feel something in the air shift. The studio lights were bright enough to turn the room into a glowing arena. The cameras lined up like metallic soldiers pointed directly at the center desk, ready to capture every raised eyebrow, every smirk, every slip of the tongue. Producers whispered into earpieces, the crew scrambled around their equipment, and millions of viewers at home prepared for what they thought would be a standard broadcast. They were wrong. Sitting across from each other were two powerful voices from completely different worlds, worlds that rarely collided, and when they did, sparks were guaranteed. On one side was Alan Dershowitz, the renowned and often controversial legal scholar. He carried the weight of decades of courtroom battles, high-profile cases, and university lecturing behind him. He was sharp, polished, and absolutely certain of his intellectual dominance. As he took his seat, he adjusted his glasses with the kind of confidence that said he expected to run the show. On the other side sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star who had quickly become known for her fearlessness, her sharp tongue, and her refusal to be intimidated, not by senior politicians, not by hostile committees, and certainly not by legal giants like Dershowitz. Her energy on the set was the opposite of his. While Dershowitz projected power through presence, Crockett projected power through control. Calm, steady, and unreadable, she surveyed the studio as if she was preparing for a moment that she had already predicted in her mind. The tension wasn't just visible, it was thick enough to cut. Even the host felt it. He shuffled his cards nervously, forced a smile into the camera, and began reading the introduction. But his voice wavered. He could sense what everyone else sensed. This debate would not be routine. This would be a collision. And tonight, the host announced, we're joined by Professor Alan Dershowitz and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. He didn't even finish before Dershowitz leaned forward. His body language was a declaration in itself. He wasn't here for discussion. He was here to dominate. And then he fired the first shot. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even framed as a disagreement. It was an outright attempt to embarrass her, right from the very beginning. You could see the shift in the audience's posture. People leaned forward in their chairs. The crew members paused behind the cameras. Even viewers at home sat up straighter. Dershowitz spoke with a slow, deliberate tone, the tone of someone who fully believed he was intellectually superior. Well, he said, glancing at Crockett with a thin smile, I hope tonight's debate includes more than the usual political theatrics we've seen from certain members of Congress. The host blinked. Crockett didn't move. She didn't even smile. Dershowitz continued, making no attempt to hide the condescension dripping from each word. Frankly, Congresswoman, your statements over the past year have shown a rather limited grasp of constitutional law. Passion is admirable, yes, but passion is not expertise. And I hope you'll allow those of us with real legal backgrounds to guide the conversation tonight. A stunned murmur spread across the studio. This wasn't a critique. This wasn't a debate opener. This was a calculated strike, an attempt to knock her off balance, to undermine her credibility in the first 30 seconds. He expected her to react. He expected her to show irritation, confusion, or even anger, anything that would reveal weakness. But Jasmine Crockett didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she simply shifted in her chair, not away from him, toward him. She turned fully, slowly, intentionally, fixing him with a gaze that made the entire room fall silent. Her posture didn't change, her expression didn't change, but something about the air around her did. It was the look of someone who had been underestimated one too many times and who had mastered the art of turning other people's confidence into their downfall. The audience didn't know it yet. The host didn't know it. Dershowitz certainly didn't know it. But that simple turn, that slow, poised, deliberate turn, signaled something important. He had just made a mistake, a big one. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't shaken, she wasn't rattled, she wasn't thrown off. She was preparing, and the look in her eyes said everything. Alan Dershowitz had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. The debate topic was supposed to be simple: accountability, justice, and the conduct of public officials. These were issues both guests had discussed countless times in different settings. Viewers expected analysis, disagreement, maybe even a few sharp lines. What they didn't expect was a personal attack so bold, so direct, and so calculated that it instantly shifted the tone of the entire night. Alan Dershowitz leaned forward in his chair with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. It wasn't the polite academic confidence you might see in a lecture hall. It was sharper, almost predatory, the kind of confidence a man uses when he thinks he already knows how the battle will end. With a pointed smirk, he delivered his opening blow. "Congresswoman," he began, coating his words with a layer of fake politeness, "with all due respect, your understanding of constitutional law is, well, limited." The room stiffened. The insult wasn't subtle. It wasn't disguised as a disagreement. It was direct, pointed, and public. Crockett remained perfectly still. Dershowitz went on, his tone dripping with superiority. "You speak passionately, sure, but passion doesn't replace proper legal reasoning." As soon as he said it, the studio erupted with whisper-like ripples, gasps, murmurs, awkward shifting. Even the camera seemed to refocus, almost zooming in on Crockett instinctively. They knew something was happening. The host, who had prepared a list of questions and follow-up prompts, froze. His plans didn't include mediating a personal attack. He looked between the two guests, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent and let the moment explode on its own. But Dershowitz wasn't finished. In fact, he was just warming up. He added, with a dismissive chuckle, "Maybe if you spent more time studying and less time grandstanding on social media, you'd contribute something meaningful to this conversation." That line hit like a slap across the studio. Someone in the audience audibly whispered, "Wow." Another person covered their mouth. The cameras caught a staffer in the background raise her eyebrows in pure disbelief. This wasn't normal debate sparring. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate her, to cast doubt on her intelligence, to paint her as loud and uninformed, all in front of a live national audience. And the worst part? It was the kind of condescending, patriarchal line often thrown at women in politics. It was crafted specifically to rattle her, to make her lose her composure, to push her into emotional territory, while he remained calm and logical. It was meant to embarrass her. It was meant to silence her. It was meant to put her in her place. But Jasmine Crockett was not the kind of woman who breaks under pressure. She was not the kind of leader who crumbles because a man with credentials tries to diminish her. She didn't flinch. Not even a blink of discomfort. Crockett didn't panic. She didn't scramble for a comeback. She didn't reach for her notes. She didn't even shift in her chair. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She slowly, deliberately turned her chair so she was facing him directly. Not halfway, not casually, fully, as if she wanted him to feel the weight of her attention. Her movements were calm, controlled, almost surgical. Then she allowed a faint smile to appear. Not a playful smile, not a mocking one. A slow, measured smile that communicated one thing with absolute clarity. You just made a mistake. Everyone watching could feel the shift instantly. The air inside the studio thickened. The tension sharpened. It felt like the moment before lightning strikes, silent, charged, dangerous. The host stared at her wide-eyed. He could sense that something was coming, something big, but he dared interrupt. Even Dershowitz paused for a split second, unsure if he had pushed too far or if she simply didn't understand the insult. But Crockett understood perfectly. And that smile, that single, subtle smile, told the entire nation, this is about to get real. The live audience leaned forward in their seats. People watching at home sat up. Producers behind the cameras mouthed silent, "Oh no" reactions. Because they could all sense the same thing. Crockett wasn't angry. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't intimidated. She was preparing. Preparing to respond with the kind of precision, clarity, and force that would turn Dershowitz's attack not only into a failure, but into a moment he would regret launching in the first place. Her smile stayed, calm, confident, controlled. And just by sitting there, fully composed, fully present, she made one thing clear. Alan Dershowitz had no idea what storm he had just unleashed. Jasmine Crockett inhaled slowly, deliberately, as if she were drawing in every ounce of strength, clarity, and discipline she possessed. Then she gently placed her pen on the table, not with frustration, not with force, but with a calm, controlled finality. It was the kind of movement that told the entire room, "I'm ready, and I know exactly what I'm about to do." When she finally spoke, her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It didn't crack. It cut, cleaner, sharper, and deeper than anything that could have been delivered by shouting. "Professor Dershowitz," she began, her tone measured and precise, "you've spent decades in lecture halls where nobody argues back. But this is not a classroom, and I'm not your student." It was as if the air itself snapped. Every head in the studio turned toward her at the exact same moment. It was instinctual, like the room collectively recognized the shift in power. The audience straightened in their seats. Camera operators leaned in. Producers lifted their eyes from monitors. And across from her, Alan Dershowitz raised a single eyebrow. It wasn't amusement. It wasn't anger. It was surprise, real, visible surprise. He had expected defensiveness, maybe confusion, maybe an emotional outburst he could dismiss as overreacting. What he didn't expect was calm, strategic fire. Crockett continued, her voice steady as a laser. "You're right," she said, "I am passionate." The word hung in the air, not as an admission, but as a challenge. "I'm passionate," she repeated, "because unlike many people who write books about justice, I deal with the consequences of injustice every single day. In my district, in committee hearings, and in the lives of people who don't have the luxury of theoretical debates." Her tone sharpened, but her volume remained low, the kind of controlled intensity that demands attention without ever asking for it. For a moment, the camera caught Dershowitz's expression stiffen. Not from anger, from recognition. He knew he had walked into something he wasn't prepared for. Crockett leaned slightly forward, not aggressively, but with purpose. The way someone leans in when they are laying down undeniable truth. "And let's be clear," she said. She paused just long enough for the entire studio to hold its breath. Passion doesn't replace knowledge, but it exposes when someone is using knowledge to avoid accountability. The words dropped like glass hitting the floor. Sharp, precise, impossible to ignore. The audience erupted, not in wild cheering, but in that explosive "oh" reaction that fills a room when someone lands a perfect hit. Even the host, the usually composed, unshakable moderator, couldn't hide his reaction. His jaw opened slightly, his eyes widened, and he looked between the two guests like he had just witnessed something he was never trained to handle. But Crockett was just warming up.
Because she wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't insulting him. She wasn't losing control. She was educating him on live national television. "You want to question my understanding of constitutional law?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "Fine." The word was sharp enough to make the room fall silent again. "But don't hide behind credentials and condescension." A ripple went through the audience, the kind of reaction usually reserved for a knockout moment in a boxing match. She continued, her voice steady. "Debate the issues, not the stereotypes you project onto women who don't agree with you." That line didn't just land, it detonated. It was surgical, it was fearless, it was the kind of statement that hits both the argument and the underlying bias behind it. Across the table, Dershowitz blinked, visibly thrown off. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't exaggerated, it was involuntary, the reflex of a man who had just heard something he didn't expect and didn't know how to counter. For the first time all night, for the first time in the conversation, for the first time in his long, confident, debate-dominating career, Alan Dershowitz had no words. He opened his mouth slightly, as if searching for a rebuttal, a quip, a combat, anything, but nothing came out. No argument, no retort, no trademark professorial lecture. Just silence. A deep, uncomfortable silence that spread across the studio like fog. The cameras captured it. The audience felt it. Millions watching at home saw it. The power dynamic had flipped. The entire conversation had been reshaped. The debate was no longer his to control. And Jasmine Crockett? She wasn't finished. Not even close.
The energy in the studio shifted so sharply it felt almost physical, like a sudden drop in air pressure before a storm. Only minutes earlier, Alan Dershowitz had dominated the stage with his trademark confidence, the clipped tone, the raised eyebrow, the dismissive smirk. He controlled the rhythm, controlled the pacing, controlled the expectations. But Jasmine Crockett's clapback didn't just interrupt his momentum. It collapsed it. Her words had sliced through the polished veneer of academic authority he was used to wielding. Instead of shrinking back, she had stepped forward, calmly, intelligently, and with a presence so commanding that the entire atmosphere of the room recalibrated around her. Everyone felt it. The audience sat up straighter, some even leaning on the edges of their seats. The cameraman instinctively zoomed in, sensing the story had shifted. Even the studio lights seemed to glow differently, highlighting the undeniable turn of power unfolding in real time. The host, sensing an opportunity to recover the format of the debate, turned to Dershowitz. "Professor," he prompted, "would you like to respond?" But Dershowitz didn't jump in immediately like he usually did. He hesitated, a tiny pause, barely a second long, but long enough for the whole room to notice. His fingers tapped the edge of the desk. He adjusted his tie. He looked down, then up, as if replaying her words in his head. This was not the reaction of a man in control. It was the reaction of a man who suddenly realized the script he had rehearsed no longer fit the moment he was in. Because Crockett hadn't argued in abstractions. She hadn't engaged in academic gymnastics. She had spoken in a voice grounded in lived experience, real-world impact, and moral clarity. Against that, Dershowitz's polished talking points suddenly felt hollow, outdated, detached. And he knew it. Still, desperate to regain his footing, he changed tactics. He retreated to the territory he felt safest in, technicalities, jargon, and theoretical frameworks. He straightened himself and said with a forced calm, "Well, I'm simply stating legal fact, nothing more." It was a subtle attempt to reassert authority, to reframe the conversation as a matter of cold clinical interpretation rather than lived reality. But Crockett was faster.
Before he even finished adjusting his glasses, she struck again. "Legal fact is important," she replied, her tone sharp yet composed, "but so is moral courage." The line hit the room like a pulse. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need theatrics. Her words did the work for her. "And sometimes," she continued, "the loudest voices insisting they're neutral are the ones trying hardest to protect the powerful." That sentence landed with such force that the audience reacted instantly, louder, bolder, more energized than before. A wave of applause surged across the studio. Some people cheered, others nodded with visible pride. A few even stood up for a moment before catching themselves. It was no longer just a debate. It was a cultural moment, a real-time generational shift unfolding under bright studio lights. Crockett wasn't merely defending herself. She was redefining the direction of the conversation. She was shifting what counted as authority, legitimacy, and truth. Meanwhile, Dershowitz attempted a half-smile, but it wavered at the corners. It wasn't the confident grin he walked in with. It was the uneasy smile of someone trying to hide the fact that he was off balance. Because he felt it. He knew exactly what millions watching at home were seeing, and it wasn't flattering for him. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her confidence, assuming passion meant weakness when in her case it only made her stronger. He had underestimated her depth, expecting emotional reaction instead of the razor precision she delivered. He had underestimated her ability to flip an attack, sharpen it, and send it flying back with 10 times the force. And most of all, he had underestimated her capacity to defend herself with the perfect combination of intelligence and fire, a blend so powerful that it didn't just counter his argument but dismantled the foundation he stood on. By this point, the debate belonged to her. The momentum belonged to her. The room belonged to her. Dershowitz sat back slightly, no longer leaning forward like the dominant force of the first few minutes. He wasn't controlling the tempo anymore. He wasn't driving the narrative. He was reacting, and reacting to someone he clearly hadn't prepared for. And the audience knew it. The host knew it. The viewers at home knew it. This wasn't just a shift in a conversation. It was a shift in power, and everyone could see exactly who held it now.
As the debate wrapped up, the host offered the standard closing line, the polite thank you, the practiced smile, the promise to continue the conversation. But anyone watching knew those words were just background noise now. The debate was technically over, sure, but the moment that would live on long after the broadcast had already happened. Viewers didn't need a recap. They didn't need analysis. They knew exactly what clip would circle the internet before the night was over. Because Crockett's clapback wasn't just a response. It was a turning point. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted Dershowitz. She didn't resort to theatrics or performative outrage. Her delivery was measured, surgical, and unshakably calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who knows the facts better than the person trying to weaponize them. And that's what made it sting. Crockett's clapback wasn't rude. It wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was factual, strategic, devastatingly effective. For a split second, even the studio lights felt like they paused, hanging in the air to witness what had just unfolded. Dershowitz, who had stepped onto that stage with the confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding debates and dismantling arguments, suddenly found himself standing on unfamiliar ground. His expression, normally so composed, flickered just for a moment with the realization that the tide had turned. After the cameras cut, the controlled chaos of the studio resumed. Producers whispered into headsets, stagehands moved quickly to clear equipment, Makeup artists hurried toward the guests with powder brushes and touch-up kits, though neither Crockett nor Dershowitz seemed particularly concerned about their appearance anymore. But the whispers? They were all about that moment. What just happened? She cooked him. No way he saw that coming. A few staffers, trying to keep their professionalism intact, walked up to Crockett quietly, not with the loud enthusiasm of fans, but with something deeper, something that looked a lot like respect. A subtle nod here, a quiet, "well done" there, a knowing smile from someone carrying a clipboard. Dershowitz approached last. At the beginning of the night, he'd shaken her hand with that trademark confidence, the energy of a man who had debated presidents, counseled leaders, and survived academic battlefields. But now, as he extended his hand, that confidence was gone. In its place was caution, hesitation, maybe even acknowledgement. Because even he knew he had lost control of the narrative. Crockett accepted the handshake with the same quiet strength she had walked in with. No gloating, no victory lap, just that same steady composure. Within hours, the outside world caught fire. Clips hit social media instantly. Some raw, some edited with dramatic music, some slowed down with captions like, "Watch this." Commentators uploaded reaction videos. Twitter threads broke down the exchange frame by frame. TikTok users created mashups, memes, and side-by-side comparisons of the moment Dershowitz tried to corner her and the moment she dismantled his argument with a single, exquisitely timed line. Headlines lit up across the internet. Crockett shuts down Dershowitz on live TV. Brutal Clapback stops him cold. A masterclass in calm under pressure. Political junkies called it a debate. Fans called it iconic. Critics called it a reality check. But for millions of viewers, it didn't feel like a simple exchange between two public figures. It felt like a generational moment. A collision of eras. The old guard facing the rising voice of a new political reality, and discovering they weren't as untouchable as they once believed. Because what Jasmine Crockett delivered on that stage wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reminder. A reminder that preparation, clarity, and truth still matter. That confidence without substance collapses quickly. That underestimating the next generation isn't just arrogant, it's dangerous. And as the night went on, one message spread faster than any headline, any clip, or any soundbite. Jasmine Crockett didn't come to play. She came to win. And after tonight, no one would ever forget it.